Hi, you're listening to Ahead of the Herd. I'm your host, Chris Hurd, and I've got a lovely guest this week. His name's Ben Terrill. He's a good mate of mine. He'll be a good mate of yours by the end of this, I think. He's been customer success legend for many years. I met him working in Vancouver at my first company, and he's not working with me anymore. I wish he was. But why don't you say hi to everybody, Ben?
Hi, Chris. Nice to meet you and your viewers.
Well, we've met, but it's nice to meet the viewers, and they're not really meeting them, are we? But they're here. Ethereally, we're meeting them. I like it.
Yes,
Very
fair
nice.
enough.
Very
Fair
nice.
enough.
Very inclusive of you. All right, Ben. So before we get into it, we're going to talk a lot this week about customer success tech, probably a bit about sales tech, and how we think about operating a tech stack for customer success. But give us a little bit of background about yourself before we dive in. What's been your favorite job ever?
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 Well, I used to stack produce at a grocery store when I was a young man, and that was a great job. You'd come to work early. That the grocery store would smell of baked bread, and then you'd just stack produce and help the little old ladies find the best tomatoes in the pile. It was a wonderful job. Least stress I've ever had.
That sounds amazing. And that's your Canadian side that enjoyed that. The British side of you would not want to help other people, surely.
Maybe
Right.
that's where I got my start in customer success.
There you go. Nice
Picking bell
transition.
peppers. Yeah.
Salt and peppers. All right. So yeah, let's dive right into it. So when you're looking at, right now you're at Brex, right? VP of Customer Success at Brex today. Um, through that transition, you've had a few other customer success roles. That's not your first one, right?
Yeah, so I've been doing customer success for 15 years now. Since before I think we called it customer success. I remember Igor, the CEO of the first company I worked at, one day said, "I think we want to change your title to customer success." And I was like, "I don't, I don't want this title. My girlfriend's not going to know what I do for a living." I'd never heard of customer success before, and that was probably 2011, 2012. But the rest of that is history. I think that was when the industry, the SaaS industry, was realizing that the retention motion was absolutely critical to business success. The sort of first customer success manager sort of conferences and that sort of thing began to happen, and then really the category customer success was created thereafter. And so that was where it started for me.
What were you before you were a customer success? What was it called?
Client services. So I think we at that business we thought that implementation was sort of the main way we could kind of deliver value through the customer success lifecycle. Was not wrong, but I think there's a lot more to customer success, of course, than just implementing customers, and that's kind of where it evolved from there.
Interesting. Are customer success people salespeople?
That's a really good question. I think there's a big difference between customer success people and salespeople generally. I think you'll typically see customer success people have a large degree of intrinsic motivation. They'll want to help customers, solve customer problems, that sort of thing. You don't get up every day and occasionally get yelled at by customers and do all that sort of thing unless you've got some intrinsic drive to make people successful. I think the best salespeople I know have a pretty large measure of extrinsic motivation in terms of variable comp and commission checks and that sort of thing. And so I see a pretty big difference between what I'd say the best customer success managers are and the best salespeople are. And I think really to maximize value during the customer life cycle, you need both. You need somebody who's going to be focused on growing that account on the commercial reality, and you also need somebody who's going to, at their core, really focus on making sure the customer gets what they need.
Have you seen salespeople be the account managers afterwards? Sort of manage that, and the customer success is separate. Have you seen that relationship? And then there's other relationships, right, where the salespeople will stop, sell, and then never speak to them again. Clearly, doesn't work. Have you seen any sort of form of this transition from purchasing to continued growth of the account? What are some of the different setups you've seen in terms of this?
Yeah. Well, I feel like I've seen everything, and I think at some point there was a fair bit of like ideological debate about this. Some of the organizations I worked at, it's like who should own what? Should this person that sells into the account originally be the person that grows the account later? Should that be a different person? Should that be the CSM? Should the account manager do what a CSM does? Like I think every possible iteration of how different personas are involved in the pre-sales and post-sales lifecycle, I've seen debated. I tend to kind of go back to what I said earlier, where I think the sales persona and the sort of success persona, it makes a lot of sense if they're separate. Now, something I really like, but I think is traditionally quite hard to scale in an organization, is to have that seller be the salesperson later on. I think in an early stage startup where you don't have a lot of people on the sales team, that actually works okay. I mean, you do kind of, I think you kind of want your sellers to learn about how the customer experiences the product after the fact. And there's some great dynamics that come out of that. You know, you've got salespeople that can quickly call on customers that are in their portfolio to be references and that sort of thing. But at some point, that doesn't scale, right? At some point, your successful salespeople that are out there hunting end up with a giant book of business that they can't maintain because they're busy hunting, or vice versa. And so you need some sort of fragmentation of role. But I think you need that happens after you've got a few more salespeople in your organization.
So change it, like the role of customer success and the role of sales kind of evolves as the company goes. You've seen companies go. I think Mobify you were in very early, right? And there was not many
Yeah.
people. So you've seen companies go through multiple phases of growth. Does the customer success role, the sales role, like everything we just talked about them being separate, that's changing as the company grows, it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of break the sort of customer success evolution into four stages, it's funny. Almost universally, I've seen as I've kind of built customer success orgs and businesses, I've seen these four stages take place. That first stage, you've got, I'll just call them customer people, and they're wearing every hat. They're support. Maybe they're doing a bit of sales. They're certainly doing implementation. They're doing troubleshooting. They're doing customer success. They kind of need to do a lot of different things, and you've got a small team. That works well, and you kind of need to learn what the specializations are required in that phase before you begin to get into a little bit more specialization in the role. And that's where you might end up with the sales persona and the success persona being different. Maybe you have an implementation role, maybe you have support, and you're beginning to build some of the foundations, like the system foundations you need in order to scale a team properly. Typically, I'd say around that stage or the next stage, customer success orgs would typically acquire like a customer success platform, like Gainsight, Vitally, Tatango, one of those platforms, and then begin to set up like the foundation for a machine that scales properly. You can put a certain number of inputs in the machine, and you get a certain number of inputs out the other side. The machine has a proper ROI, and it begins to work. And then from there, I think you end up with something that's sort of like technology led, where you've got systems in place that are allowing your specialized customer success people, so implementation, sales, success, support, whatever they are, to be proactive and to actually get into a customer's account in a much more dynamic way and then realize more value. And so each of those stages, I think, kind of happens. I'd say they take, I don't know, 6 months to a year, depending on how fast the business is growing, before you kind of evolve to that final stage.
That's well, now we're moving on to tech, which is great. We're starting to talk about customer success tech. And I find I cannot deny that sales tech is doing a lot of the job that I've seen myself do in the past. And I'm wondering now, I'm not in customer success, but I do manage customer success teams and have bought tech too early, by the way, got that late stage phase when we didn't really need it, which was a massive disaster. Quick question for you. How much of the CS job is being done by people and how much is being done by tech today? And how is that different than 10 years ago?
Yeah, I've frequently seen articles where it's like, the customer success job is going to be obsolete or mostly obsolete because of tech in X number of years. I think there's a big element of technology in a well-functioning customer success team, but it is not a solution to all your ills. And poorly executed tech, I think, as you kind of alluded to with sales tech, is much worse than no tech at all. And so I've seen teams that are, run with Airtable or Coda that are doing a better job than organizations that are using, a conventional CSP like Gainsight. So I think it really depends on how you implement the tech. What I think begins to get exciting is as CSMs, we're consuming a lot of qualitative data. We're consuming like a conversation or a customer that might have sent us an email that they're angry, or a NPS score with a survey in it, or bits of diminishing product usage, but we haven't actually like understood what that diminishing product usage means. And you've got all this information as CSMs that you're consuming in this kind of big bucket. And in a traditional model, prior to a lot of the technology that is available today, I used to view that like the CSM is kind of beholden to the organization to in some ways consume that, define it, standardize it, and then share it with the rest of the business. Share it with the rest of the business to drive the product roadmap. Share it with the rest of the business to inform marketing decisions. Share it with the rest of the business to inform like when an executive should get involved. And that was really time consuming
Sure.
and hard. Like if you're a CSM and you got more than 30 or 40 accounts, like goodness gracious, you're not going to be able to properly consume that information and share it in an appropriate way. What I love about some of the large language model based AI now, and some of the other technologies I've seen, is we can begin to get really smart in how we consume that. And so, there's technology that exists now where I could be like, okay, what's going on with all of his account, and the software could summarize everything that's been said in every gong call to every member of our organization, everything that's in CSAT, NPS surveys, like support cases, all that stuff, and provide something that as a human we can consume, but provide something that's a pretty good current assessment of the account. And you just couldn't do that before. Or you could do it, but it'd be incredibly time consuming and incredibly costly. So I think that's where technology has a chance to really disrupt the CSM motion. Is it's going to make our CSMs better. But I think it's a long way away before an enterprise account that's spending, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars with somebody in a year says, yeah, I'm okay not having a human in the mix. I just think our humans are going to get a lot more predictive. I think the CSM job is going to get a lot more enjoyable. And I think the profession of the CSM is going to be a lot more strategic, because you're going from like a role that was in some places just parsing data to actually a role where you begin to develop some more strategy and thought around accounts.
I think that's great. That's a super positive way to look at it. In customer success should be about talking to people. That's fun. Like talking to people and talking to customers is fun.
It's the
Reading
best part
data
of the
is
job
not
most of
fun.
the time.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, okay, asterisk. But I mean, you did kind of answer that there is a big portion of the job that is now being done by tech. It's just a crappy bit of the job that nobody really wanted to do.
Exactly.
With, I feel like CS is significantly less likely to get automated than sales for this reason. Customers never want to speak to a salesperson, but they almost always want to speak to a person when they've bought it. Like once you're onboarded with the product, you want people a lot. Like you'll speak to sport, and a lot of people like the documentation and automated and stuff. But when it comes down to it, the default bottom line is I need a human being. In sales, people want to speak to less and less. The buyers want to speak to salespeople. So I do feel like if we're going to talk about tech replacing an industry, I don't read the CSM magazines, whatever they are, CS Monthly, but so I don't know that they're talking about replacing them. But I see the sales ones, and it seems a lot more likely to me that we're going to automate salespeople than CSMs, especially with that personal touch bit.
Yeah, I think there's certainly some elements of the sales journey that probably will see a lot of automation. I don't know for sure. Like if you're in a larger like deal, I think there's still going to be a need for a human in there, but I think there's certainly parts of it. And I wonder, if that role of like the strategic advisor, which I think the CSM is post implementation, and maybe like a traditional like solutions consultant is pre implementation. I wonder if that just develops a much more prominent role in the sales cycle than they have before.
That's interesting. Yeah. Every time you came into a sales cycle with me, it was strategic. Right? We brought the CSM in because it was part of the sales pitch. So if the CSM and that strategic piece and understanding customer needs is brought in earlier, and part of that, honestly, taking the time away that you need to be doing all of this manual work gives the CS person more time to speak to customers on both sides of this contract. Like that's
Exactly.
great.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think and I'm a big fan of when it's appropriate bringing a CSM into sales deals. I think most customers respond quite well to that. Will welcome sort of the change of tone and approach that an experienced CSM can provide. And then I think ultimately you end up with a better arrangement at the end, because you end up with that connective tissue. And I think where so frequently I see customer engagements fail is the connective tissue between the the SDR to the AE to the solutions consultant to the implementation person to the CSM to the account manager. Like all those times are where things begin to fail. And so if you can have a little more overlap in the engagement, you end up with batons don't get dropped. They feel like they're seamlessly passed, and the things the customer says to you during the sales cycle, they don't need to repeat when they're then working directly with their CSM.
Yeah, yeah. I wonder if I read something recently about QBRs, just changing the topic slightly, but it was about people getting frustrated with QBRs and that QBRs are becoming a sales pitch.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. We will. We've got to get back onto tech in a minute, but it intrigued me, and I was waiting to talk to you about it because it does feel often that when I have QBRs with vendors that I work with, I know what's coming, and it does feel like a bit of a sales pitch. Have you? Like, I don't know if you saw that article, but have you seen that happening at all? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, my experience is buyers are smart. Buyers know when they're talking to the sales persona or the success persona after like they've been acquired, right? They know when they're being sold to. They know if one of my CSMs say, "Hey, I really want to introduce you to Lucille, who is a partner with me and she works on my team." They know that's going to be a salesperson, right? They know all that stuff, and I think QBRs as well. I mean, just you've clearly got some like some
And
experiences
progress.
in the past or with sales, right? And like I hear you, right? And I think we we sometimes don't do ourselves any favors by like being too aggressive into selling into an account. That said, I think done properly, a QBR should provide a ton of value. And I'm kind of definitely speaking from the vendor's perspective here, but that value is often acquiring more solutions from the vendor. So I think we just need to be really careful in how we present that. And when we're doing QBRs and spending a ton of time saying, "Hey, Chris, let's get your boss and make sure her boss is also on the call because we really want to make sure everybody can see the value of solution ABC." We actually got to deliver something that's got value, right? It can't just be like promoting the roadmap and then trying to turn that into a sale. And so QBRs for the sake of QBRs, just like software for the sake of software, I think often can lead to some poor results. I tend to think there's moments in the relationship that you can kind of like deliver value that are not necessarily these like scripted QBR moments. Certainly, like coming up before a renewal, for example, or if if your sponsor changes, like there's these natural life cycle moments where you can do something that's really helpful to the customer. Maybe a new individual on the customer side that's essentially signing the checks for your product, but also doesn't have this like modicum of QBR around it because I think, as you say, there is a little bit of resistance and trauma that people experience because they get these QBRs that are exclusively sales focused.
I mean, trauma might be a strong word for what I'm feeling, but maybe I need to dig into that. Maybe it is, and I need to find that out. There's a couple of things you've said so far that I think are really interesting and positive about CS in general. It's kind of low tech. Like the touch point that was organic. You're talking about organic touch points, and those organic touch points are things that you get from knowing the account. I mean, sure, you can set alerts in a system, but you really do need to know the account well to know when these things are happening more often than not. And then when you were saying earlier, like the people that track it in Airtable, that I mean, if you are having to do that, it's like when you write something down, you remember it, kind of thing, right? If you actually take the time to sit down and write something, you remember it. If you have to go into an Airtable and manage certain stuff, there is something that comes with that of understanding the account a bit more. So maybe there's an area of that running CS in a more like organic, low tech way, or at least having a low tech element to the way you service customers, can drive more of these moments rather than being so formulaic and robotic. Maybe that's why people are getting sick of QBRs because it's just
Yeah,
predictable.
yeah, I think so. I mean, it's certainly there. I think back to the best experiences I've had with the best CSMs, and you know what made them good is they knew the product really well, and they were good at their job. They were on top of it, and they were focused on our goals. And you don't like that's that's it, right? I mean, whether it comes in the package of a really structured QBR or it comes in the package of having to be able to have a really strong relationship where you can be transparent with each other, the human part of that is just like good CSMs enabled to do their job well. And that's kind of always been my philosophy with building CS teams is obviously hire good people, and that's not groundbreaking, but like hire good people, give them as many tools in their toolbox as they can to be successful, and then get out of their way because the right people are going to be motivated to do the right thing, and as long as you just give them the things they need to be as effective as possible, they're going to achieve magic. And I've always found that works really, really well.
When do you get back in their way? No, you
I
don't,
mean,
you don't.
it's like I hope my team's not listening, but I'll like I listen to their gong calls. I don't tell them I'm listening to their gong calls. I'm still on some level a bit of a control freak, but I've learned to manage that. So I will like monitor what my team is doing in a pretty like I'll look at calls. I'll try and do a lot of things, but very rarely do I, you know, hey Chris, I noticed you said this to this customer on this day. I don't do that. I just am like kind of measuring to get some situational awareness about how my team's performing overall. And then if I see themes, then we develop something to address it. But I do kind of still like to be in there. But it's sort of like great parenting is your child might think they're running free in the backyard, but really they're being watched the whole time in case something that bad happens.
I would have no idea about parenting, but I get the analogy. Gong, mate, we're not promoting Gong, by the way. We didn't in no way promote any product, but it bloody has changed the game. I love Gong so much. I love call recording software, is what I should say. Like you can go on a treadmill and listen to sales, like on
Yeah.
listen to sales calls on a drive. I can put sales calls on. It really has changed the game. That's one of my favorite pieces of tech. You mentioned Gainsight's really important. So you've got Gainsight, which is doing the analysis. You've got Gong doing your call recording. What are some of the other core parts of the CS tech stack?
So we in my current position, we've been looking at some vendors that do some of these sort of predictive insights. I think there's a lot of vendors out there that are doing that now, like AI-based predictive insights. Uh, I think that's going to be a component, a pretty component of the CS tech stack. So, you know, based on the data I feed you, and these 20 customers have churned. Like, what were some patterns that they were exhibiting prior to churn that we can key into for the next one, right? And so I think there's a lot of cool things that are happening there. Um, I tend to sort of manage my teams through some sort of call recording software, some sort of CSP. So Gainsight or many of their contemporaries, which are also great. And then CRM, so the HubSpots and the Salesforces of the world. I don't think there's a lot of other tech on top of that. I've seen some interesting things about like QBR deck automation and that sort of thing. Back to the point about QBRs and need to provide value, I'm not convinced yet, certainly at the scale of the teams that I've been running, that like that sort of thing is super important, but I could see how some businesses would take that on. I mean, I tend to like to just give my CSMs as many tools as they can to work with the customer. So give them a good way to like call, text, WhatsApp, whatever that may be, give them a good customer record, enrich the data properly, and then allow them to kind of do what they need to do with it.
I like to keep it simple too. You're kind of looking at three things, right? The CRM. What did you call the CSP, customer success
Yeah,
platform?
yeah.
And call recording. Like keep it simple. Well, I do feel like CRM's eating a lot of software up too, and I see so many different things that used to be separate tools now becoming just part of the behemoth of the CRM. Is that happening? You mentioned predictive insights is something you're looking into. Surely the CSPs are going to be having this baked in, no?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of what they would like to do, and this is where I struggle. Is there's so much overlap of solutions, like we mentioned Gong, but Gong does call recording, does email recording, does AI insights. I think you can ask Gong now, hey, what's going on with this account, and they'll do a summary similar to some of the tech I mentioned before. So they do all this stuff, but there's other vendors that are adjacent to that, and kind of things overlap. And so, admittedly, I find it to be a pretty heavy cognitive load as a CS leader to keep track of all of that stuff, and then know how to filter out the hundreds of inbound sales prospecting emails I get a week, how to filter out the ones that I think are really going to deliver value. And so I tend to like rely on what other CS leaders are doing, and we kind of have talk. But there's so much out there that I find it's really hard to kind of figure out what's great and what isn't.
So the CS WhatsApp group, is it like hyper friendly because you guys are all really friendly, or is it the place where you just get everything off your chest and it's a super
Yeah,
mean?
super good looking, talented, hardworking, hyper intelligent people, and then myself.
Oh, hey. Well, the sales one
Hey.
is a load of really tired blokes with massive bags under their eyes because they've drunk too much coffee, being angry. That's generally the. But all right. So I like to keep it simple. I like that. I like that you're not. I mean, a lot of this is about keeping it simple. You're talking about low tech, not too many layers to it. it sounds like maybe I don't know if people aren't approaching you to sell you stuff. I'm constantly getting inundated with new sales and CS tools. Have you found that when a new product is being purchased, is it coming through you, or do you have IT finding stuff? Is there a procurement department? Like, how do you find new tech gets embedded into the process?
Yeah, I think you kind of end up like you kind of have two models that I've seen in customer success orgs. You either have sort of a consolidated operations function where you're sharing the sort of operations people with other perhaps sales roles, marketing, right? And you've kind of got this like group that's handling that stuff. And in those cases, I think like technology is probably might be suggested by a department or a subject leader, consumed by that group, figured out how it can kind of be deployed across the org, and then there's like this sort of burden of deployment and then sort of the adoption challenge. I think that obviously works well in kind of keeping everybody aligned. Perhaps because I'm CS and run CS orgs, I tend to prefer the sort of CS ops role where you've got an operations person that is exclusively, or operations people that are exclusively tied to customer success. Customer success ops is a pretty big role function now, and when like in that case, then I can kind of make my own technology decisions. I want to consider what other parts of the business are doing, but you can move a lot faster and make your own technology decisions. And those groups will be responsible for maintaining my CSP and that sort of thing.
Do they roll up to like a RevOps? Do you have like RevOps
Well,
and sales?
I mean, my bias is I prefer when they roll up to me, and sales ops is a sales ops person, rev ops is a rev ops, marketing ops is a marketing ops person, and they kind of chat. When it's kind of this collected model, it's a little harder to move fast. But I think at a point, it makes sense for a business to combine those ops roles into one consolidated group.
Yeah, that seems to be relatively new. I mean, RevOps in general, I don't think is decades old, right? RevOps itself is probably only like 10 years old. So CS Ops, how long has that been around?
I mean, maybe a similar amount of time.
Yeah.
It's funny. I mean, I don't know. Like my deep experience with sales orgs is limited beyond 10 years back. But I don't know what like
Well,
how that stuff is being
Christian
done
was
now.
like Salesforce Ops, wasn't he?
Yeah, I
He
guess
had like,
so. I guess
that
so.
was 2013. There was
Yeah,
a
10
kind
years
of a
ago.
sales ops. I'm pretty sure he's sales ops at Salesforce now. I don't know. I'll
Well,
ping
he
him.
did
I'll send
well.
him a link to this, and he can listen in and
Did
find out.
well.
I also beat him at Street Fighter once. I don't know if you know that, but
I don't believe that.
I, I had one round. I was Chun Li. I pinned him to the corner. You can verify it. We'll put this as a little
Okay.
clip on LinkedIn, and then he can verify it.
All right.
Uh, all right, last one. In terms of, we talked about the future of tech, but I love to hear some stories of when it didn't go so well in something that was implemented and it was just not, you can call out names, but something that just you wish that if you could go back, you either hadn't purchased it or you'd thought of it differently or evaluated it differently or you just, there's always something that you could have changed. Is there anything in your memory that you can think of?
Yeah, I mean, many, 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 many. I think the common theme with them is, and I mean, being on the vendor side, it's probably a common theme in why deployments I've been involved in the vendor team have failed as well. Like, it's often not the vendor. I mean, in a way, it's the vendor because the vendor should make sure the customer is set up for success. But when I've purchased software and it's not been successful, it's because I didn't properly resource, invest, plan, strategize, get stakeholder buy-in for said software, right? And so maybe I was able to convince someone to give me the budget, or maybe I had authority over the budget myself, but I wasn't able to take that and turn that into reality and then get like the muscle memory I needed in the organization to make the software successful. And that's happened every time software that I've purchased has failed. It's been for that reason. And then conversely, the vendor, I would say in those cases, maybe it's a little bit on them to say, hey, like, we want to make sure you're successful. You're going to need X, Y, and Z. By the way, you don't have Z. Like, we've actually got somebody who you can hire to be like, have some sort of support and engagement there. But that universally has been why I found software projects have failed for me.
Don't blame, don't, it's not, I love it. Like most people say it's entirely the vendor's fault. You're being even less, you feel like it's mostly not the vendor's fault. And I think it's so accurate. So many times people go, well, it was on top right of Gartner and I kind of needed it and the salesperson was great. So I bought it and it just fails 70% of the time. That even Gartner brings out that stat themselves that it fails 70% of the time. I spoke to a CIO once and I said to them, why do you trust that? Why do you always just go for it? And like whatever analyst report that I'm choosing top right of, I said, well, I can blame them. And it really doesn't matter if it fails because I can blame someone else. Like openly said that to me.
That's
And I
not
think
good.
that is just inherent, right? It's like it's different for you because you're buying CS tech for your, like when you're the CIO, you're buying all the tech and it all falls on you. I think if you bought the wrong software, no one's going to come down on you and say, Ben, how dare you buy this piece of software, right?
Yeah.
When you're a CIO, it's a little bit different. But my word, I couldn't believe just the blaming. It's the vendor's fault if it goes wrong. And well, I did use an analyst report, so it's not my fault. Make more effort in your
Exactly.
purchasing.
I mean, to that point, I've had a number of vendors sort of, do the pitch, and we ask that question: how much time it's going to take? Oh, it's going to be a quarter of an FTE for 3 weeks. And I'll be like, no, it's not. And don't. I mean, and my advice to them is don't tell me that, because if I resource that and the project fails, it's also on you, right? And so I think, when we talk about the vendor's fault, like those are areas where I was like, yeah, the vendor needs to like you don't undersell the amount of effort it takes to deploy your solution properly, because when your solution doesn't get deployed properly and they churn, it's on you. So, and I see that happen a fair bit in some of the vendors that pitch to us.
Well, that's probably a Goldilocks area for salespeople because you've already decided often on the vendor you're going with. So my job's done. So your guard is down a lot more as a buyer, right? You don't do as much due diligence on that bit because you've done your due diligence. I'm tired of doing due diligence. How long is it going to take to implement? Okay, great, sure. That sounds great. So they're probably taking advantage of that. So I think the lesson there is just in general, do more due diligence, but do some due diligence in the implementation. Do just as much in that implementation pitch as you do in the actual technology and the security and all the other stuff. Actually, apply that same due diligence to the implementation bit. Like a
That's
quarter of an
incredible.
FTE, 3 weeks. Come on, just say that. Come on, come on. Ben, this has been great. We talked quite a bit about tech. We didn't talk too much about Hawaii or why you've got a plaid shirt on and live in Hawaii, and I've got a Hawaiian shirt on and live in Canada. I don't know how that happened.
That is the universe just doing an amazing switcheroo on us, Chris. I love it.
The switcheroo. That's what we're going to call this episode. Ben, thanks so much for having me. Oh no, I had you. The switcheroo, you see? It works every time. I'll see you soon, mate. It's great to chat.
Pleasure, Chris. Take
See
care.
you, buddy.